Okay, so finishing up chapter 5 with algae. So algae are autotrophs. Autotrophs means that they're self-feeder, meaning that they can get their organic molecules, they can make their organic molecules themselves. They can make their own sugar. They can make their own food. And they do this by photosynthesis. So autotroph means self-feeder. And algae can be unicellular or multicellular. Our seaweed is multicellular algae. And they are really important ecologically. They are, producing about 70% of our oxygen in organic matter in aquatic environments. So they're really used as like the top of the feeding web. I'm sorry, the bottom of the feeding web. They are going to be producing a lot of food for those larger organisms along the way that eat them. Algae are also the source of agar or agarose that we use to solidify our medium in our Petri plates, and a substance called carrageenan, which is a solidifying agent that is used in both laboratories and food production. So you'll find this carrageenan ingredient in many like beverages that have a thickener to them. So I'm thinking of like smoothies or like coffees, or there's, if a drink has kind of a thicker profile to it, it might be carrageenan that's causing that. Our makeup, lotions, things like that can have carrageenan in it, all from algae. Algae are not typically pathogenic, right? We're not really going to talk a lot about algae in this semester, but some of them do produce toxins. And the one that we're going to cover here is going to be especially harmful in algal blooms. A bloom is when algae overgrow, or they grow to a very significant population size, and they become very, very dense. And so if you have an algae that produces toxins and it's having an algal bloom, now that body of water is going to have a high concentration of toxins, and those toxins can be really harmful to us. They can impair the liver, they can damage the nervous system in both aquatic animals and for us. This is an example of one you want to remember. This is our dinoflagellates, and our dinoflagellates are those single-celled algae on the surface of the ocean. When they have a bloom, it's called a red tide because they have a red pigment to them. And when you see a red tide, that signifies that our dinoflagellates have had this bloom, and the water there is going to be thick with that toxin. What we are worried about, right, is we're not going to go in and drink seawater, but we will eat shellfish and we will eat, seafood. So it is very important to not eat seafood if there is a red tide. So the toxin in name here, the major toxin producers of something that causes paralytic shellfish poisoning. So it can paralyze you. This is a look at a dinoflagellate. This is the organism that is responsible for red tides. The shape of these guys is just really various. There are a lot of geometrical shapes, but they are encased in cellulose, which is the same cell wall material of plants. And they can swim, right? Some have two flagella. And so just a really interesting form of algae that you probably would not have thought of. This is a unicellular algae, right? This is Cladomonas. You don't need to remember that, but some of our algae can be unicellular, so it's just one organism, one cell. You can see that it does have an eye spot, just like our Euglena in the past, because it needs to find the light. It has a chloroplast. That's our organelle for photosynthesis. All right, and we're ending up with lichen. So lichen is a organism that is formed from two different kinds of cells. So it's a symbiotic relationship. It's a mutual relationship between fungi and also algae. So you can see the schematic of our lichen. It has an algae zone, and then it also has the hypha you can see here in the fungus zone. So it's a collaboration of those two organisms. The algal zone can help photosynthesize and produce sugars. The fungus can mine the substrate that the lichen is growing on. It can degrade molecules from what it's growing on, and it can feed itself and also give nutrients to the algae. And also this is a nice little safe structure for both of those organisms. So this is a cool picture of that lichen. You can see the green algae. Oh yeah, so this algae, it can be algae or it can be a kind of bacteria called a cyanobacterium, and this is a photosynthetic bacteria. So either one of these can be in that lichen. And then of course the other part of it would be a fungus. And they're living in a symbiotic, which is mutualistic. They are both benefiting from their interaction of living together. So that's the relationship of symbiosis in a lichen. These are some varieties of lichen. You do not need to know the forms of them, but you can see that you've probably seen this hiking around, in the woods or even at parks. They tend to grow on rocks and trees. And so you can just see the various forms. So this crustose, again, you don't need to memorize it, but it's very crusty. Then you have one that looks a little bit more leafy. And then you have one that looks like hair. So these are all different forms of lichen. And again, there are both algae or cyanobacteria and a fungus. And that's it.